Before starting, I would like to say a few words, let's say house rules. Please keep your microphone muted. This is very important. I would like to inform that we provided interpretation with the help of our friends from the World Bank in 4 languages. Actually, these are the languages of the eligible countries that are going to be get some financing under the BBC project. So we have Georgian, Romanian, Turkish, and Ukrainian. Under the interpretation button, you can follow the language that is you prefer to follow. According to me, this is English, but I don't know for you. So use the language that is you understand better. Yeah, I'll stop here, and I have the pleasure to invite Ambassador Lazar Comanescu to say a few words, our Secretary General, to say a few words, let's say a welcome address to the participants of the workshop. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, dear Rosita, dear panelists and fellow participants. I am really pleased to be with you today and launch this very important regional stakeholder webinar initiating consultations on the environmental and social aspects of the Blue the Black Sea GEF regional project. As you all know, we are approaching the implementation phase of this project, which will start at the beginning of the next year and will run for 4 years. More details about the project will be provided by Mrs. Rosita Stoeva, our executive manager, who will speak immediately after me. So I won't enter into detail on that. What I want to say is that for us, your opinion matters a lot, and I encourage you to actively participate in the discussions of today. The BSEC organization has decided to support this project, which aims at tackling marine pollution and catalyzing blue economy investments in the Black Sea region. And that corresponds with the BSEC goals under the economic agenda for the future. We believe that the investment component of this project will directly contribute to closing the funding gap for projects with regional importance and thus complement national resources. Initially, national level activity will take place in the 4 GF eligible countries: Georgia, Moldova, Turkey, and Ukraine. But regional events, training and study visits involving all Black Sea littoral countries are also envisaged. I'd also like to underline
Vreau să vă spun că
the active participation and the Republic. Starting from February 2021, we have organized 7 consultations with all CMA countries to understand the state of play, the needs of the public authorities and private sector, to hear the environmentalists. Online surveys have been also provided during the consultations. We have embarked on this journey as we are aware of the fact that fighting and winning the battle against maritime pollution in our Black Sea is a necessity. Being successful in this endeavor depends on your interest and on the input of all of you. So wishing you every success in your deliberation. I thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Very, very inspiring speech. Before continuing with the presentations, I would like to have a family photo, let's say, even though it's on virtual one. But I would like to invite everybody to open their cameras, just to, you know, just to feel the pulse a bit of being together, if you agree with me. And Avi will support to take the photo. So please we can wait for 1 more minute, I believe. Evie, please tell me when you're ready. Shall we wait a bit for 1 more minute, 1 more second?
Yes.
Okay, we should wait. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So the real work starts. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your presence. And I will be delighted to present the project itself, of course, very briefly, because we did it already during the consultations, as you already mentioned. We had 7 consultations with all littoral states plus Republic of Moldova. So Evie, could you please share the PowerPoint presentation? And I would like, of course, to give you a short, let's say, presentation about the project and what is expected, the results. Of course, thank you very much. So as Ambassador Comonescu has highlighted in his opening speech, we in the BSEC Secretariat lay a particular importance on hello? Yes, of course, I'm sorry. Particular importance on project, on the BBC project, and actually its investment component, because we believe that it will help close the financial gap, particularly for project with the regional dimension in the Black Sea, where the efforts of one country alone are not sufficient to solve the problem. Evie, could you please go to key facts? Thank you. Yes. When it comes to this the project, what I wanted to share is the following. It's very important, and that we are expecting to receive 6.6 million from the Global Environmental Facility International Water Window. The BSEC Secretariat has been, let's say, designated as implementing agency, implementing body of this project. When it comes to long-term objectives, we consider that this project will improve environmental health of the Black Sea and increase the social and economic benefits for the population. The project itself, because now we are in the preparatory phase of this project, on the project, let's say the implementation phase will start beginning of next year and will be for 4 years, actually until the 3rd quarter of 2025. Maybe you can proceed with the next slide. Here I would like to share with you that at the national level, there are some activities that are envisaged to be implemented. Actually, the idea of intensifying public and private investments for pollution reduction in the Black Sea is put in the heart of this project, of the BBC project. We believe that in medium term, the project could help to create more incentives for public and private investments for pollution reduction, all leading to the long-term outcome of an improved environmental status of the Black Sea with increased economic and social benefits for the population. How we can do that on national level? Through different activities. Here I would like to mention that there will be a detailed report on cost of pollution, cross-sectoral cooperation mechanism with blue economy focus, national investment plans for pollution prevention in the Black Sea. I would like to yes, I don't believe everybody is muted, but of course, please accept that, you know, we are many people here. So in any case, national plans for pollution prevention and circular economy, which are including financial targets and monitoring, as well as business competition and grants are envisaged, as well as fundraising for investments to reduce pollution and improve water quality runoff to the Black Sea. The next slide shows the actually at regional level what is envisaged. Here I would like to share that, as it was already mentioned by Ambassador Comanescu, that awareness raising on the issue of pollution through knowledge exchange campaigns are envisaged to be organized, to be held. Here, I would like to share with you that there are many regional projects that can be, of course, will help in that regard, and the project with regional dimension that can have same focus of interest that can be also envisaged to cooperate with. I can share the Black Sea Connect, Bridge, the recently launched Bridge and Doors project. So there are many regional developments that can be, let's say, can be used to create a synergy and networking when it comes to marine pollution and marine pollution in the Black Sea. So the next slide shows the current understanding of the whole project, how we see this project is going to be implemented, I mean, for the next 4 years, and who is going to be actually involved in the project. As you can see, all relevant national and regional partners, the most important actually, are considered to be included in this process, as well as many regional and international organizations, for example, the Black Sea Commission, because with the Commission we are working very close, UNDP, European Commission, of course. There is a Black Sea Assistance Mechanism recently launched to support the Common Maritime Agenda for the Black Sea. We are cooperating with them as well. Conference for Peripheral Maritime Regions as well. They have a very good regional body called the Balkan and the Black Sea Commission. We are cooperating with them as well. And last but not least, when it comes to partners, I would like to share that under the BSEC BSEC organization, there are 2 related bodies with whom we are cooperating very well. The Black Sea Trade and Development Bank and the International Center for Black Sea Studies. So their involvement is also considered in this project because they have a lot of experience when it comes to regional environment. Here, there is also what I wanted to share is that under the project implementation unit is going to be established at the Secretariat. So to observe the overall management of the project and to support the project implementation for the next 4 years, let's say. Last but not least, very important body that I wanted to share with you is this regional steering committee, which is going to provide the policy level and strategic guidelines, and will be comprised of relevant national agency, mandate to coordinate and manage marine pollution, and of course will include, as you know very well, and you may let's say recognize, the CMA focal points, BBC focal points, of course, designated by the governments for eligible countries. And of course, we will invite civil society representatives to come up with their ideas and their understanding of the region as well and their needs. The next slide is also very important, and I wanted to show it to you because to understand where we stand when it comes to project preparation progress. Here, for the preparatory phase of this project, we signed a contract with the World Bank dated February. Now we are expected the one for the implementation phase to be signed. I don't know which date, but of course depends on that all steps are fulfilled. After all the steps are fulfilled, so we are ready to do so. I would like also to inform you that when it comes to those 4 national workshops, national consultations that we hosted together with the Black Sea Commission, with the World Bank, with different partners from the region, detailed information about what has been achieved so far, you can find on the BSVKC website. I will afterwards put the link in the chat box, and you can go to all the deliverables, as well as all relevant documents that are already disclosed with the translation in 4 languages are also available on the website. So everything related to the preparatory phase and to what is expected from the project is there. So including the environmental and social documents. Everything that is related to the project is on the BSEC website. Avi can share the link, or later on I can do it. And what I wanted to is that project appraisal is envisaged for November. The World Bank board approval is scheduled for December, and when it comes to the actual implementation, as I told you, it will start early next year. Of course, the timeline is very preliminary, but at the same time, there has to be a time frame. And if there is a need, this time frame can be, let's say, adjusted according to the needs of the members involved. And yes, I will stop here because in any case, everything that I already shared with you is presented, and of course it's available online. And I would like to give the floor exactly, it's time for, to experts to talk about environmental and social aspects of this project. And I will, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Haluk Cheriboshe to take the floor, present himself, and present the environmental aspect of this project. After that, Mr. Koch, Levent Koch, will take it over and continue with the social elements of the project, and we will have time for Q&A session. Thank you, and Mr. Haluk Bey, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I think you are muted, Haluk Bey.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Ms. Stoeva, and thank you very much for all the participants of this meeting. Just shortly introducing myself, I am Haluk Cheriboshe, who is a competitive seasoned environmental consultant, working in the field for more than 25 years as one of the founding and managing partners of a leading environmental company in Turkey, environmental consultancy. And I am part-time faculty at Middle East Technical University as well, teaching on environmental assessment and management courses. So let's not lose much time and get into the what we have done about the project and describing you about the documents we have produced, the plans for the environmental factors, especially plus social, in our presentations. Next slide, please. So let me very shortly introduce you the agenda. I'm going to do some introduction about how we'll flow this presentation and then the Q&A session. Give some explanation of project components, which Steve already did that. Talk about the environmental and social aspects of the project and the tools and mechanisms developed to manage the rather, let's say, negative or potential risks and impacts. And then we have the environmental and social management framework, stakeholder engagement framework and plan, and labor management plan or procedure that we would like to present to you today. Next, please. So basically, the aim of today's meeting and workshop is to introduce the anticipated environmental and social aspect of the project, and mainly both the positive and the, let's say, potentially adverse impacts, and to provide you the means that have been developed, that have been worked on regarding how to manage the risks and impacts. Plus, of course, to inform you, the stakeholders, and receive your feedback on the environmental social issues so that could be incorporated into the project development and then followingly into the project implementation. How we are going to process this today, we are going to do the two presentations as an environmental expert myself, and then as a social expert, Levent Bey will be continuing with that. We can have your questions and comments in the chat box, and then at the end of our presentations, both presentations, we'll have a Q&A session. But if we are going to talk on that, we will kind of ask you to ask your questions in English if you're not going to ask it in writing in the chat box. And then finally, we have a Mentimeter survey where we would like to address you a couple of questions, in fact, 10 questions that we would like to get your opinion, and we will see the results of your answers both online at the same time. For that, we'll provide you a web page and then a password to enter to the system and provide your provide your answers to our questions, and we'll be discussing on that. Next, please. So, Mr. already discussed about the project itself. Just let me introduce or summarize the project components. The project has mainly three components. economic case to invest in pollution prevention and reduction, the first component, green innovative financing, the second, and the project management, the third component. Our main concentration would be, in fact, in component 2 with regard to comparatively potential adverse impacts through eco-innovation challenge, basically because we might have some physical activities down there under the grants that will be provided in the scope of the project, so that there might be some environmental consequences resulting in that. In component 1, we'll be having more concentration on the policy grant and the investment recommendations for the national level, how the policies and institutional framework could be enhanced to achieve a better water quality in the Black Sea, and what type of national investment recommendations could be made. And there we would have more, I should say, strategic decisions and strategic issues. Next, please. As this summarizes, in the component 1, we'll have environmental social concerns at more strategic level. That's why we have prepared the terms of reference for strategic environmental and social assessments to be conducted for such studies, like developing some national plans or policies or some investment planning, which might have some environmental results and consequences that should be considered and assessed under a strategic assessment. For component 2, we have the environmental social concerns more at grant or what we call sub-project level, especially under sub-component 2.1, eco-innovation challenge, where we have like a two-phase challenge down there. One would be a regional-wide challenge targeting early concept and ideas, which would be more, we might say, conceptual and planning structure. And the other would be national challenge in the 4 focus countries that are eligible to get some funding there. The challenge would aim to support the pilot implementation of proven concepts and some piloted ideas, which would include some consulting work, some perhaps non-consulting work, some goods, and comparatively we're expecting limited works and construction issues down there. But for those, we would have environmental concerns, and that's why, in fact, at this stage, environmental social management framework has been developed, which would be followed by project or sub-project specific environmental social management plans to be implemented on site, together with stakeholder engagement plan and labor management procedures. Next, please. When we look at the environmental and social aspects of the project, we should admit that mostly it would be positive environmental social impacts, which is the aim of the project and which the project would be following up. It's basically the overall goal improvement of the environmental status quality of the Black Sea. And for this assessment of national policies and legal frameworks, what we have there and what can be developed further in line with the CMA, so that we can have a better quality in the Black Sea, and which would be reflected in the blue economy and in the social and economic welfare of the countries that's basically in the Black Sea basin. One other issues would be development of national investment recommendations, again for pollution reduction and management, and strengthening the framework and the dialogue for the regional enhancement of the economic and social welfare, which are all positive impacts expected out of the project and work for that. And in the achieving those means, we might have some, of course, potential environmental social risks, which we are expecting to be rather low, or at most at moderate scale, according to the World Bank classification. And that would be morely in connection to the scope of eco-innovation grants or sub-projects. What might we have down there? Some small-scale civil works, installation or construction type activities to pilot the eco-innovations that are going to be provided grants. Some small-scale improvements in agricultural practices like irrigation, fertilizers, and pest use, and that's why we'll be addressing them, as you will see. And some limited temporary and type-specific impacts from those activities, which would be low in magnitude, mostly reversible, and could be readily mitigated, which means we have already some generic means of mitigation that could be used and that could be implemented, so that those impacts would be minimized, would be reduced to acceptable levels with good practices, good international practices. Next, please. For this rather more adverse, let's say, potential impacts, what have been developed at this stage or up to this stage of the project. In terms of reference for strategic environmental and social assessment, as I mentioned, that would be used more for the case of component 1, and then an environmental and social management framework. With that, a stakeholder engagement framework or plan and labor management plan and procedure, which we are going to try to provide you some insight of those plans, which you can reach through the BSEC website as well. In addition to that, there is an environmental and social commitment plan that has been prepared together with BSEC and the World Bank, which provides the material measures and actions and the specific documents to be prepared and followed up, together with timing and responsible parties, and mainly BSEC will be implemented those in the implementation phase of the project for the 4 years that will come up. Next, please. If you come to the ESMF presentation, so giving you some explanations about the environmental and social management framework that we have prepared, we can talk about, if you can continue with the next slide. This is the general content of the presentation and basically the ESMF impact. We have the development procedure, development phase, environmental social requirements of the World Bank, and that's basically the project is supported by the World Bank. So the World Bank rules, World Bank standards is implemented together with the national standards, of course, for any activity that would need any national permits or any national related activities. We'll be looking at some expected positive environmental and social impacts and the potential adverse environmental and social impacts and risks together with mitigation measures. You would see that we have a list, but they are including general impacts, I should say, because the project activities are not yet specific. So our framework aims to cover all potential activities with potential impacts that have to be addressed. We'll be talking about very shortly institutional arrangements and the ESMF implementation process. And finally, I'll be summarizing the monitoring and reporting needs in the implementation phase of the project, and then give the ground to our social expert. Yes, please. In the ESMF development, what we have done, we have reviewed the national level regulations, especially for the 4 eligible countries. And then we look at their requirements and compare them with the World Bank environmental and social standards, so that we can have a sort of gap analysis, which would be closed as in line with suggestions provided in the ESMF. We provided an overview of the baseline conditions. Of course, it was not rather easy for a regional project covering all the Black Sea basin. We concentrated on the 4 eligible countries again and providing a rather higher overview. Then we have identification of the potential environmental social impacts and mitigation measures. So we provided them in our ESMF. Then we described an implementation process so that things would be going smoothly and the institutions involved can be cooperating in an efficient way. And then, of course, stakeholder engagement and public consultation and disclosure is an integrated and required part of all this project. At the end of the ESMF, we have some practical annexes, we should say. The World Bank Group exclusion list, which basically gives the list of activities that cannot be funded under the project. And then we have an environmental and social screening checklist, which would be used by the BSEA PIU to screen the grant applications in terms of its environmental and social aspects, so that to find out if it's eligible or not. We have the project categorization of the World Bank as a general document for environmental and social risk categorization. And for this project, low and moderate risk category grants or projects, sub-projects are only eligible. We have an indicative structure for the sub-project ESMPs, especially for the activities which would have some moderate environmental and social risks. Sub-project level ESMPs have to be prepared in accordance with the World Bank environmental and social framework and standards and the ESMF produced for the project. We have a sub-project ESMP checklists for the comparatively lower impact or risk projects which would not need a sub-project level ESMP, but easy implementation of the environmental and social measures on site. And we provided lastly the good practices for management of pesticides in accordance with the World Bank Environmental and Social Standard 3 and the World Bank Group EHS Environmental Health and Safety Guidelines. In case that some agricultural activities might be supported under the eco grants, eco innovation grants, and that might include some pesticide management. Next, please. Here, let's talk about very shortly about the environmental and social requirements of the World Bank. Some of you might be rather acquainted with that, some may not. Environmental and social framework became effective in October 2018 by the World Bank. Before that, there were operational policies, more safeguard policies that was the setting the standards, but we have in the ESF. And then, according to the World Bank, defined 10 environmental and social standards, among which 6 of them are relevant for the project scope, our BSEA project scope. And these are basically ESS 1, 2, 3,
Bunlar ESS olarak adlandırılıyor.
I think some noises are coming on, so I just from our
Bazı
interpreters.
sesler duyuyorum.
It's a problem. I hear
Should
either
I go ahead?
Azerbaijani or
Yes, we have here. Sorry, I'm sorry, Haluk Bey. There is a intervention from the interpretation. I don't know how it happened, but yeah. Could you please start continuing, and we'll see where we stand with the interpretation.
Okay, let me continue. I was talking about the 6 ESSs that's relevant for the project scope. Number 1 is assessment and management of environmental and social risks and impacts, which basically sets the standards for environmental and social assessments for the World Bank supported project activities and how those would be assessed, how those would be considered, which also have to consider all the other ESSs, of course, relevant ESSs. Standard 2 is labor and working conditions, which sets the terms for what type of labor and working conditions should be implemented on sites in line with international standards, like ILO standards with that. Number 3 is resource efficiency and pollution prevention and management, which basically provides us the standards with regard to our wastes, our environmental impacts, environmental and social impacts in terms of creating pollution, discharges, emissions, affluents, and how they are going to be managed. Number 4 is community health and safety. By the way, occupational health and safety is covered under standard 2 as well, labor and working conditions for any activity that might have some risks on occupational health and safety, which I'll be shortly talking about. Community health and safety is basically concentrating on the potential health and safety risks on the community where the project takes place, on the public, on the locals down there. And then we have the biodiversity conservation and sustainable management of living natural resources, standard 6, which basically guides us and puts standards on how we have to identify sensitive sites if there are any with regard to biodiversity and biological resources, and if there is going to be any impact on that, how we should handle those. And finally, the last relevant project standard is standard 10, stakeholder engagement and information disclosure, which is relevant almost in all World Bank operations. Could you get to the next slide, please? And then we have the standards that are not relevant, but I just wanted to mention it for your information. Standard 5, 7, 8, and 9. 5 is land acquisition restrictions on land and involuntary settlement. If there is any land take for the project and which needs some acquisition activities or involuntary settlement, this standard has to be implemented, which is not relevant for the project because any activity that might cause some land acquisition is not eligible to get funding. Standard 7 is indigenous peoples, sub-Saharan African historic underserved traditional local communities. Again, this is not relevant for our project because we are expecting to have an impact on indigenous peoples, or if such a case, it would be again ineligible to get funding. Number 8 is cultural heritage, basically ruling about how we identify the cultural heritage sites that might be impacted from our activities and how to manage them. So basically, again, this is not relevant for our project because if we have such a site that is of concern, those projects would not be eligible. Number 9 is financial intermediaries, where the World Bank use some other financial bodies to distribute the funds that that standard might be relevant, which is not for our case. Two operational policies that we looked at is OP 750 and OP 760, projects on international waterways or projects in disputed areas. And these are not triggered by our project activities either, based on our project characteristics and the exclusion list. Next slide, please. In addition to the ESF and ESSs as supporting documents, the World Bank Group have environmental health and safety guidelines, general guidelines, and industry sector guidelines. General guidelines is relevant for our project in terms of environmental, occupational health and safety, community health and safety, and for construction and decommissioning activities that might take place in the scope of our project. So that's a reference document that has to be looked at, and which we had looked at during the preparation of our ESMF, SEP, and LMP. And industry sector guidelines, there are a number of guidelines more than the ones you see on the slide, but we basically listed those ones which might be of relevance to our project scope depending on the grant activities. And that's why we just listed these guidelines, which should be referenced or which should be used in development of our sub-project ESMPs where needed and implementation of the management activities. Next slide, please. Expected positive impacts of the project is basically prevention or reduction of water pollution through some innovation grants on nutrient treatment, urban wastewater treatment, water depollution, and water recycling and reuse. That's the basic grants that the project will be looking for. In addition to that, the project is aiming for strengthened governance, so more stakeholder engagement and regional dialogue to exchange both science, information, technology, and then perhaps funding to come up with a better Black Sea environment. In terms of that, we also look at the conservation of aquatic species, improved water use, and better water quality, reduced soil pollution, which all somehow end up in the marine environment, rather indirectly, from policy and capacity development activities, which would be included especially in component 1, but to some extent in component 2 of the project as well. So we have a lot of impact, expected positive environmental and social impacts, which are all beneficial for the Black Sea quality and the economic welfare and the green economy in the region, or the blue economy, let's say. Next slide, please. When we come to environmental social impacts and risks, I will go through a couple of, or a list of impacts, which you might think that, okay, we have talked about just 4 or 5 positive impacts and there are a lot of negative impacts. We should admit that those impacts are potential, so it depends on what type of eco-innovation challenge projects we would have. And all of them does not need to take place in a certain activity, but we try to put it into a framework that will look at an overall view to all potential impacts and provide the, let's say, already regularly available, regularly known, and being implemented on many sites, mitigation measures. We start with air quality. We might have dust and exhaust gases due to an excavation activity on site, hauling activity, and the machinery we might use. And we have some standard measures for that, like water spraying, good maintenance of vehicles, using some exhaust gas control systems, etc. So I'm not going to go into detail of all those mitigation measures, not to bore you a lot and keep the time on track. So I'll be just providing you some insights from there, and we can, or you can follow up with the presentations what we have. The next impact will be noise, which is again a natural impact when we use some machinery and vehicles for any activity on construction sites or in agricultural activity. And for such impacts, again, we might have some covers for the engines that causes noise, require some maintenance of vehicles, proper maintenance. And one activity or one measure might be just keeping those activities, the noise activities, during the daytime, if you need some enhanced work or some high accelerated work that you might need to continue, just abandoning any nighttime activities. Next slide, please. We're expecting positive impacts on the water quality of the Black Sea, especially, but of course, through our activities, we might create some water quality impacts which might be adverse on the immediate local water sources, which might be the surface runoff from sites, which might be domestic wastewaters from the workers on site, and which might be leakages from water purification systems or some waste storage or material storage areas, which are again comparatively easy to control under small-scale activities, like for surface runoff, providing proper drainage systems and measures for control of sediment transport. For domestic wastewaters, having some discharges to existing sewers or establishing some septic tanks, impermeable septic tanks, which then the relevant local authorities like municipalities will take away the wastewaters. And for leakages, we might again depend on our drainage system and create some impermeable ground so that we don't have the leaks to the soil. Next slide, please. When we come to waste, we might have domestic construction, agricultural, and if you have some chemicals, paints, others, some hazardous waste on our sites, which we need to handle. So for that, of course, the waste bins for domestic waste, some separate areas for mineral waste and proper closed containers, and of course, transporting collection of these waste, especially if they are hazardous, by licensed collectors, might be among the measures that we recommend. Or of course, site-specific and case-specific measures might be further considered when it comes to preparation of the ESMPs and implementation of that. Soil erosion and contamination might be an impact again from physical activities, where we can have like solid impermeable grounds for chemical and waste storage, proper selection and use of pesticides to minimize any residues in agricultural activities. And as you see, some of the measures, mitigation measures, would serve more than minimizing one impact, which is rather practical in that sense as well. We might have impacts on vegetation and biodiversity from vegetation clearing or removal of topsoil or some excavation activities. So we're expecting to have pre-information, an inventory, a survey on the vegetation types or trees to be cleared on site, if there are any. If there is a sensitive biodiversity site, it should be assessed accordingly. Even if there are some vegetation or trees, we need to have an information on what's going to be cleared, what can be damaged, and then how we can, of course, compensate them if we need to compensate them. Like among these, with regard to the wildlife, prohibiting any forms of hunting, foraging, lodging, or damaging activities for the passage or the livelihood of the wildlife would be prevented in that sense. Next slide, please. When we come to occupational health and safety, that's working conditions, labor and working conditions standard. It's important that we provide integrity of the workplace structures, safe access to sites, all types of emergency controls, and of course, basic facilities such as toilets, resting, eating, and changing areas. So the important thing is that providing proper working conditions for our workers to keep them safe and to get their services properly. What we can have down here, we can have assigning especially some experts on site to control those, because when we come to especially occupational health and safety, it's more follow-up and persisting on the measures to be taken, relevant measures. So staff, an expert on that would be important. Proper housekeeping would certainly help for the things, providing signposts, and of course having an emergency procedure or plan, including the COVID-19, the last 2 years, most important communicable disease, or any others as well. Next slide, please. Then again, for occupational health and safety, we need to look at the slips and falls, working at height, moving objects and machinery, dust, noise, materials handling. All that stuff might have some consequences with regard to workers' health and safety, so that we should have the standard measures, in fact, which we're expecting on any type of construction site, even if small, that we have to look at, which might include, again, proper housekeeping, some occupational health and safety trainings for the workers, some toolbox talks, some protective equipment, personal protective equipment, like hard hats, safety glasses, masks, boots, depending on the site conditions. And of course, one important point would be record keeping on all those, but we'll come to that in monitoring and reporting part. Next slide, please. We have some potential social impacts as well. I'm not going to get in any detail because our social expert will be going over those, but we can talk about like dividing it into two. The first part would be about more perception of the communities and how they feel, how they think on our project activities, on our grant sub-projects. And the other would be more comparatively material, like traffic issues, noise and vibration issues, potential damage on public utility. And of course, we have provided some recommended mitigation measures for managing, handling all of those. Next slide, please. This is the institutional arrangements, which Mrs. Sturba already explained very extensively, so I'm not going to go on that, but this is the overall structure of the project. And based on that, we try to develop the ESMF process. How would the environmental and social aspects should be managed in the project, and who would be responsible for doing what? Next slide, please. Okay, this is basically a 9-step process that we have defined, starting with identification of grants to be financed, that's eco-innovation challenge grants, and then environmental and social screening of those grants, grant applications by the PIU, the BSEC PIU and the World Bank to exclude the projects that have to be excluded, and then to screen the environmental and social risks so that they can be handled accordingly. And if there are some other risk category activities in those grants, an ESMP, site-specific or sub-project specific ESMP, we can call that, would be developed, a draft ESMP. That ESMP would be reviewed by the PIU and the World Bank, and a public disclosure and consultation will be conducted on the ESMP. This is more expected to happen locally. And then finally, with the feedback from the public disclosure activities and consultations, the ESMPs will be finalized, take its final form, approved by the PIU and the World Bank, and will be ready for implementation. In that sense, incorporation of the environmental and social requirements and these ESMP requirements would be put into the grant and work contracts associated with the grants, any construction of that type of physical work contracts. Then implementation of the ESMPs for moderate risk category sub-projects, and the ESMP checklist for low risk sub-projects is expected by the grant beneficiaries who would be implementing the sub-projects. The monitoring, supervision, and evaluation of those grant beneficiaries would be at the local level, of course, from time to time, and the PIU would be the main responsible for that, together with the support, at least technical guidance from the national focal points, and the World Bank would be the overall, would have the overall responsibility for the supervision. Next slide, please. So we are coming to the end. This is the process and what's going to be done at each stage, and who is the main responsible parties. We have the grant application and selection process, then sub-project preparation process at this slide, please. So basically, we have the beneficiary country, the focal points, and what we call host of innovation, by the way. In the national level eco-innovation challenge, it's expected that the national focal points, BSEC focal points, would be identifying a host of innovation. This host of innovation can be like municipalities, community cooperatives, industrial entities that are willing to basically test the eco-innovation under their domain. And for this national eco-innovation challenge, grantees can develop and implement their pilot scale activities under the host of innovation. So there we have both the BSEC focal points and host of innovation as responsible parties for certain activities, which would basically include the general technical guidance for overall implementation of those sub-projects and an overview of the activities in support of the BSEC and BSEC PIU. As you would see, the main responsibility down here would be on the grant beneficiaries, on the sub-project level that they would conduct, and on the implementing agency, which is the BSEC PIU, to carry out both the screening at the grant application and selection process, and then for checking the permit status of the sub-projects at the preparation phase, prepare country-specific stakeholder engagement plans, conduct public disclosure and consultation process together with the national authorities, of course, review the draft ESMPs, review the steps, disclose the ESMPs, and finally approve the ESMPs. So the comparatively large load would be on the BBC PIU together with grant beneficiaries. What would be the World Bank support the PIU for reviewing the screening results and give no objection for the grants to be selected. And then again, the World Bank would be providing technical guidance to PIU and assisting the PIU in developing performance and monitoring systems and reviewing and approving of the ESMPs. But it doesn't end here. Next slide, please. So after project preparation, of course, there will be project implementation and in line with that project reporting. Again, in implementation, the responsibility would be on the grant beneficiary, basically on site for implementing all the ES requirements, incorporating those requirements in their work contracts with their contractors, and basically doing the first monitoring of environmental and social performance of the contractors on site. Again, the national bodies would be expected to provide some technical guidance for the grant beneficiary at this stage. But the BSEC PIU will be incorporating the ES requirements in the grant agreements, review the work contracts where the grant beneficiaries will be doing with the contractors, and coordinate the selected grant beneficiaries together with national focal points to ensure and adopt the relevant rules and standards and do all the monitoring on the environmental and social part of the project. And of course, this comes to the World Bank. World Bank will review the grants and work contracts and will evaluate basically the monitoring reports of the PIU. When we come to monitoring, basically monthly monitoring is expected from the grant beneficiaries to be made to the BSEA PIU in terms of environmental and social measures. And BSEC would be providing regular semi-annual reports on that. But of course, that would be sort of online reporting, especially with accidents and incidents that would need immediate attention, which would be incorporated in the grant contracts as well. Immediate information would be expected from the grant beneficiaries, and accordingly, the BSEA PIU would take relevant actions and report it immediately to the World Bank. And those are also established and stated in the ESMF. Next slide, please. Sorry for taking you so long, but we are at the final part of my presentation. When we come to monitoring reporting, it would be during construction operation phase of the sub-projects, mainly aiming to verify implementation of relevant mitigation measures and covering the monitoring issues that's basically required in the ESMPs, in the stakeholder engagement plans, LMP, and in line with, of course, International World Bank standards in that sense, including the workers' code of conduct and the grievance mechanism, which in the next presentation you will have further information on that. And grant beneficiaries expected to provide these monitoring reports on monthly basis to PIU, but not only to PIU, but to host of innovation and the country focal points as well. And the PIU will be doing regular reporting semi-annually to the World Bank. I think this was the last of my slides, and thank you for your kind patience for listening to me. The grant is 11th phase now. Thank you very much.
Yes, before continue with Mr. Levent, Coach, I would like to thank very much Haluk Bey for this excellent presentation. And I would like to share with you something that is in the chat box. Allow me for 1 minute to share with you something very important that was shared by the Turkish Ministry of Transport Infrastructure. Actually, now the Turkey is in charge of the Common Maritime Agenda. I believe most of you know that. They're a coordinator of the Common Maritime Agenda for 2021. And there is a very interesting event that I wanted to stress. It's the one on 11th of November. And of course, everybody is invited to register and to follow. It's on greening the maritime transport and preparedness for marine pollution prevention in the Black Sea region. And of course, you can register. The link is provided by Sevdap Özdoğan. It's in the chat box. So please register. Actually, the BSEC permits will be there. There will be presentation provided by our Deputy Secretary General. And of course, I believe this will be very interesting even when it comes to Black Sea. Of course, he proposed also some of you to be part of as a speakers. Of course, it's up to you to decide how to respond, but I believe our experts can be part of this of the topic provided from the Turkish ministry. So I will stop here. This just to give Levent coach to prepare himself for 1-2 seconds, and of course, Levent Bey, please stick to 25 minutes if you agree with me, in order to have some time for Q&A. Thank you very much.
Okay, I see that we are 82 people in this call. I welcome all of you. My name is Levent Koç, and I serve this project as a social expert and prepared the SEP and LMP documents that I'm going to present to you. Before I start, I apologize about my voice and possible coughs during the presentation. I've been sick recently, but I think it won't affect our session today here altogether. Of course, I'm not going to talk you all of the documents, which are quite long, but as far as I know, you already have the links of the documents and you can reach them via BSEC website. But I'd like to start with stakeholder engagement plan and continue with LMP documents afterwards. Next slide, please. This is the content of the SEP presentation, SEP part. I'm not going to read all through of it because during the presentation, we of course follow the steps and I will mention the topics when the slide comes. Next slide, please. Yes, when we say SEP, what we mean actually, what is the purpose of the stakeholder engagement plan? We think that the stakeholder engagement plan actually sets the scene for developing meaningful, sustainable, sincere relationship with stakeholders. This is the first purpose of it. But apart from this, of course, receiving feedbacks, inputs, and concerns of different stakeholder groups, sustaining the ownership of the project by stakeholders, and also managing the social risks and potential impacts. When we work on this SEP document, we try to suggest a couple of principles to ensure that engagement activities serves to the purpose above that I mentioned recently. The plan aims to ensure consistent and coherent engagement with stakeholders throughout the project. The SEP will provide meaningful information, and also engagement activities will be inclusive, transparent, respectful, timely, and multi-channel, and ensure the subsidiarity principles. These are the principles actually the SEP is built on top of it. Next slide, please. We followed following steps to develop this SEP. When I say SEP, of course, this is the abbreviation of Stakeholder Engagement Plan, but I'm sure all of you know. Firstly, we reviewed the national level regulations and requirements, and also international ones. We developed a strategy to identify and map the key stakeholders at national and regional level. We offered an engagement approach for project affected parties, vulnerable groups, and other interested parties. And finally, we suggested principles and guiding procedures for grievance mechanism. Next slide, please. As Haluk Hoca already mentioned during his ESMF presentation, we actually aiming to develop with all of you country-specific stakeholder engagement plan. But we developed a regional SEP, which also aims to provide a framework for country-specific SEP preparations. And BSEC is responsible entity for implementing this regional SEP throughout the project life cycle. And BSEC will document and keep log of all engagement activities, will provide updates on stakeholder engagement to committees, and SEP key performance indicators and progress updates will be published on the project website. Next slide, please. We developed this SEP by following a strategy starting with identification of stakeholders, followed by stakeholders mapping, and finally, information disclosure methods, which I'm going to present to you now, how we did this, what methodology we have used, and what kind of activities we suggested. Next slide, please. Yeah. We try to we try to represent the diversity of stakeholders in this region. But of course, we are all aware that there will be more local and national level stakeholders needs to be identified. This will be the aim of the country-specific SEPs anyway. And with your contribution, we will it will be crucial for not only creating this, identifying the stakeholders, but also developing the SEP in general. And when we try to identify the stakeholders, we look at the relationship of the stakeholders with the project itself. In that sense, we categorize in three these stakeholders, like affected parties, other interested parties, and vulnerable groups. And secondly, we try to understand the category of these stakeholders. You can see some examples here. I'm not going to read all three of it, but like government and public institutions, local communities, or academic institutions. These are a couple of examples in that sense. And finally, since we are managing or will be implementing this project regionally, we have to look at the geography as well. There will be local stakeholders, national level stakeholders, and also regional level stakeholders. Next slide, please. After identifying those all stakeholders based on their relationship with the project, their category, and the geography, we added another column to understand their relevance to the project. You can see just a couple of examples, like communities are affected parties, their category is community, they are local, and their relevance of the project, we can say national plans will have impact on their livelihood and social cultural practices, and grant projects may have impact on their livelihood. It can be a positive impact or negative impact, of course, and also their social cultural practices. We listed all of these stakeholders, and we suggest to follow the same path when we are developing the country-specific SEPs altogether. Next slide, please. Next phase after identifying the stakeholders is stakeholder mapping. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this stakeholder mapping matrix. I will not go into too much detail on it, but basically we determine the level of impact and interest and level of influence of each stakeholder. Then we place them in the matrix. You can see on the right. It shows us who are our primary stakeholders, who are our secondary stakeholders, and we can map them quite easily by using this matrix. Apart from these two factors like impact, interest level, and influence level, we also put two other columns in order to understand the stakeholders. The first one is their expectations and concerns. And the second one there is their position against the project or with the project. This is important for us, not only to understand the stakeholders, but also it gives us a ground to measure how good our stakeholder engagement effort is. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to understand the expectation of the communities and meet those expectations. We listen to their concerns and we try to address those concerns. And at the end of the day, of course, we want, since this is a very positive project with positive impacts, we would like to have all our stakeholders on the side of the project. Therefore, I mean, this is not only a table to understand the stakeholders, but also it's a kind of a measurement to measure our stakeholder engagement activities. Next slide, please. As you all know, that engagement is a continuous activity and requires continuous information disclosure throughout the project lifecycle. And some of the information to be disclosed in various stages of the projects are as follows. I mean, these are not the complete list, but from this stage of the project, we foresee that we have to, and we will, and we are actually disclosing project summary and documents, E&S documents like BSEA, ESMF, CEF, CEPS, and LMP. Grievance mechanism, which I'm going to talk to you soon about this. Eco-innovation challenge announcements, application process, evaluation, and results. Similarly, grants announcements, application process, evaluation, and results, project progress updates, and project outputs. These are the main documents or information will be disclosed throughout the project with various methods, of course, which I'm going to mention soon. Next slide, please. Yeah, here you can see the table. You can see the list of information will be disclosed in certain stage of the project on the left-hand side, so on the left column, like design and preparation stage, implementation stage, or closeout stage. And also we put, and we also suggest to create a similar table for country-specific steps as well. Put down the information to be disclosed in that specific project stage. And also the target stakeholder group. I mean, we are going to disclose this information to who, actually. The answer of this question is actually the stakeholder groups column. And finally, we also offer methods, proposed methods for disclosing those information to the target stakeholder group in certain project stage. There are different methods, as you can see. I will not read all of it, but these methods can be official correspondences, emails, committee meetings. I know that there are COVID restrictions, but if we can manage organizing face-to-face events, if not virtual open day events, press releases, there will be different tools. And I'm sure that when we start creating the country-specific steps, we will come up with new methods which will be more meaningful for local level, and we will work this all together, I hope, in the future. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, stakeholder engagement is a key for this project, and we must ensure to reach all stakeholders by using various methods. In that sense, we also recognize the cultural, socio-economical, language, and educational differences among stakeholders in the project area. Since this is a regional project, again, these differences is more than a national project, national level project, or local level project. In order to engage all stakeholders, we suggest to disclose information in written as much as we can, also adapting the content, formats, and language according to stakeholder groups' needs. Respect, of course, COVID restrictions, but seek opportunities to face-to-face interactions, reach wider committee groups via open day events, and disclose the documents on the project website. We think that if we manage to do those key steps, then we will increase our chance to reach wider community groups and wider stakeholders. Next slide, please. There will be a dedicated grant information disclosure event. Therefore, I will not go into detail at this stage. But I should underline that the project itself aims to follow a participatory and transparent process for eco-innovation challenge and grants. And one thing I should underline that local level engagement are very important to encouraging applications from local organizations. We know that the national and regional organizations will have a chance to reach the information easier than the local ones, and also vulnerable groups. Therefore, we have to focus on also reaching those groups to make them part to this grant process. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Vulnerable groups are always important in any kind of international project. This is important for World Bank as well. And for our project, we will pay a special attention to those vulnerable groups. We identified some generic groups as vulnerable, such as households economically dependent on agriculture, fishery and tourism, elder households in rural areas, women-led households, youth, especially who are not in education, employment, or training, ethnic and language minorities living in coastal Black Sea zone, local SMEs, young and women entrepreneurs, and persons with disabilities. These are the groups, as I told you, that we identified generically. But more detailed vulnerable group identification will be done in country-specific steps. We suggest to designing differentiated approach for each group, because every group have different needs, and of course some certain tools works for some certain groups, but not the others. Therefore, the differentiated approach is very crucial. And also we suggest to reach those groups proactively, not to wait them to reach to us. And therefore, a proactive approach is very crucial for reaching to vulnerable groups. Local business associations and local NGOs, normally they are not in the vulnerable group identification normally, but in our project, they may be defined as vulnerable groups in the country-specific stakeholder engagement plans. And as I mentioned before, additional engagement tools we may need when we start working on local, when we identify local vulnerable groups. We all know that by experience, face-to-face interactions works better for vulnerable groups mostly, considering that they might have some difficulties reaching to internet or having language difficulties. Therefore, we try to seek opportunities, of course, by considering, of course, the COVID restrictions as well, but seek opportunities to organize face-to-face meetings, interviews, or any form of interactions. Next slide, please. Yes, grievance mechanism. Grievance mechanism is very effective engagement tool, actually, to listen stakeholder concerns and suggestions. Therefore, we developed a transparent and unbiased grievance mechanism for the project. The mechanism aims to reach all stakeholders by organizing awareness raising sessions on grievance mechanism, dedicated to the grievance mechanism, identify issues and concerns as early as possible to address them timely and proactively, continuously improve the project performance, demonstrate project's commitment to meaningful stakeholder engagement and respect for stakeholders' opinions and concerns. The mechanism itself has 5 stages, as you can see on the graph, on the visual. The first is, of course, receiving the feedbacks. In order to receive the feedbacks, again, we have to announce this grievance mechanism with various tools that everybody actually aware that there is a grievance mechanism. And when when an applicant have a concern or, I don't know, suggestion, they submit their grievances and the feedback received. And we suggest to provide an answer in 5 working days for the applicant, to the applicants. And after receiving the feedback, the grievances should be logged. We suggest to use a software for it, but of course, the mechanism itself, what kind of software or process will be used, will be defined in the implementation phase. When we log the grievances in some method, software, or basically simple Excel, there will be any investigation phase. When the investigation phase is done, then the resolution will be proposed to the applicant. If the resolution is not accepted by the applicant, then we have to go back to investigation phase again and try to understand why it is not accepted. And after accepting, after the resolution is expected by the applicant, then we move to monitoring and evaluation phase. This is basically how the grievance mechanism will work. Of course, there are some more details, but you can reach those details in the SAP document. Next slide, please. Last but not least, we also aim to use monitoring and reporting as an engagement tool by involving stakeholders in monitoring activities and reporting back to the stakeholders. I know that monitoring and reporting mostly use more, just keeping the records of the project, and it is more internal stuff. But in our project, we suggest to involve you, actually, our stakeholders, to those processes as well, to inform you from all the stage of the projects. Next slide, please. This is all for stakeholder engagement part. Next, I will briefly and quickly, how much time I have, Rosissa?
Let's say 10 minutes.
Okay.
You can
Great.
do it, yeah, I believe so, yes, thank you.
I think I can. I'll be quick, as quick as possible. Move to labor management procedure document. Again, it's a large document with too much information in it. I'm not going to present all of it, but give you some highlights in order you to share, what kind of aim we seek for creating this document and what are the main findings and requirements that we suggest. Next slide, please. Again, we can pass through this. I will talk about in the presentation anyway. Next slide, please. Yeah, labor management procedure is again an important document for us, and it is developed to promote a fair and equitable labor force, labor practices, protecting project workers' rights, to ensure the management and control of activities that may pose labor-related risks. LMP describes how the project will comply with requirements of ESS2 standards of World Bank and sorry, and with labor, employment, and occupational health and safety laws of Georgia, Moldova, Turkey, and Ukraine. Next slide, please. Before determining the procedures, terms, and conditions of LMP, we reviewed, of course, all the labor and OHS legislations of 4 project countries and developed LMP strategy and principles. And finally, we developed our labor grievance mechanisms, which I'm also going to mention in this presentation. Next slide, please. In the LMP, there is a 2 category. There will be project direct workers and also contracted workers. Contract workers like consultants, trainers, or workers in grant projects. Direct workers are like executive project manager, project coordinators, specialists, and experts in that sense. Next slide, please. Haluk Bey also mentioned the risk, and therefore I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but based on project appraisal document and also our analysis, we do not foresee a major labor risk in the project. Impacts will be temporary, reversible, and easily managed with mitigation measures. Also, based on World Bank categorization and also our views, gender-based violence, sexual exploitation and abuse, and sexual harassment risk was addressed as low, and labor influx is not expected. However, mitigation measures has been identified, defined, even though these risks are defined as low. But mitigation measures such as awareness raising on gender-based violence to project workers, grievance mechanism for both communities and project workers, and introducing the grievance mechanism to project workers and communities that it covers complaints related to sexual harassment and sexual exploitation and abuse cases. Therefore, we try to mitigate those risks, even though they are defined as low. Next slide, please. The grant projects may include some small-scale civil works, which may have some impacts on working conditions and occupational health and safety. But therefore, we created this labor employment and procurement strategy. We include labor employment and procurement in the documents. Grievance mechanism, it's created for minimizing those impacts. Site-specific emergency response plans suggested to be prepared. Trainings on OHS rules and measures, of course, personal protection equipments, use of personal protection equipments, housekeeping measures in places, sort of. I mean, these are the mitigation measures and also protective measures for COVID-related risks as well. These are in the ESMF documents and also in LMP document as well. What kind of mitigation measures are suggested to minimize those small-scale civil works related risks? Next slide, please. Labor management policies and procedures are critical output of LMP documents, and this section outlines labor management procedures, OHS, reporting and monitoring, and other policies and procedures to be adapted by implementing entities in each beneficiary country. Policies and procedures will apply to all project workers, consultants, and contracted workers engaged in the project activities. And the list of policies and procedures in the project management institutions and contractors are subject to apply are presented on the screen. I mean, there's a long list, and for each item, you can find an explanation and regulations in the LMP document. It will be too long, therefore I'm not going to go into details for each of it. But I can, as you can see, that there are the document covers forced and child labor issues, non-discrimination, gender equality, or how to tackle with COVID-19 related risks, and refuse to work policy. All the topics are addressed in LMP documents that you can reach and read all through it. Again, as I told you, that is a very long part of this document, therefore I'm not going to go into details. Next slide, please. The LMP document set the principles on terms and conditions and provides guidance on local labor management procedures. Before getting into terms and conditions on various subjects, I'd like to share the main principles we suggested for determining requirements. We did not actually set binding and singular terms on conditions on the topics which are regulated in the national law, since again this project will be implemented in 4 countries. They all have different terms and regulations, and which means that if a topic is covered in the national laws, strictly regulated, we didn't try to change it and put some international benchmark or some other criteria which may not be implemented during the implementation phase. I mean, I can give an example as weekly working hours. I mean, in all countries, weekly working hours is regulated. There are differences, and we respect those differences. Therefore, we didn't put binding and single terms on it. However, if a topic is not covered in national laws, we introduce we suggested to use international standards like grievance mechanisms. Grievance mechanisms is not covered as strict as weekly working hours. Therefore, we suggested to use international standards for this project on that particular subject. And of course, there will be zero tolerance on highly critical issues such as child labor and non-discrimination. There will be no excuse, no tolerance for those topics like child labor, forced labor, or non-discrimination. Next slide, please. I will just go through some of the terms and conditions that you can find again in the LMP document. We suggested that all the parties, all the project workers in all countries respect those requirements throughout the project. For age, recruitment age is 18. As I told you that child labor is a no-go in this project. There are different descriptions in national laws, but for this particular project, below 18, no project workers in any part of the project will be employed. And also, the wages will be paid monthly unless the nature of work agreement does not allow monthly payments. And the salaries will be paid in the first day of the following month. This is another requirement for the project. Working hours, as I told you earlier, there are some differences. In Turkey, weekly working hours are 45 hours. However, in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, it's 40 hours. National laws, of course, also regulates the overtime, and we respect that. However, the overtime rate cannot be lower than 1.5 of agreed hourly rates. Night shifts, again, it's already regulated in the national laws. Therefore, we just suggest to respect those national laws. The minimum uninterrupted weekly rest, we suggest to apply 24 hours, but actually we encourage project workers and our agencies who will be part of this project in the implementation phase to increase the weekly hours to 48 hours if it's possible. LMP covers other areas as well, but I will not go into detail again, and you can see on the LMP document for other suggestions for different topics. Next slide, please. We can pass through this as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, again, the grievance mechanism. Actually, this grievance mechanism very similar to stakeholder engagement grievance mechanism. Therefore, I mean, it's not very different. The stages are almost same. But it's important that this mechanism is developed for the workers, for the project workers. We seek or aim to make this grievance mechanism available for all project workers. And in order to increase this awareness, we suggest to organize awareness raising events, trainings, producing brochures, and also using different means of information documents in order to increase this awareness raising and also encourage the workers to submit their concerns, suggestions, or any other thing that they want to transfer to the management of this project. it is important. The other important part is making this grievance mechanism easily accessible. Again, in the LMP document, there are some other suggestions to increase this accessibility for the project workers. And also the grievance mechanism also adapted to receive sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment related complaints as well. LMP grievance mechanism again start with feedback, receiving the feedbacks. And after receiving those feedbacks, the grievances will be logged again. It will be investigated. A resolution will be delivered to the applicants. If it's, of course, if it's not anonymous applicants. If it's anonymous, it will be hard to reach, of course, those applicants. But at the end of the day, all the grievances will be monitored and evaluated by the project management team and parties. And again, as I told you before, all of these processes related to SEP and also LMP, the feedbacks will be provided to the committees and to make them part of the project, not only presenting only the progress of the project, but also the efforts we are making on stakeholder engagement and also labor management side. And we will share all these feedbacks with committees and try to receive their feedbacks to, of course, increase, to improve our project management in Bloom the Black Sea projects. I will stop now. Thank you for your attention. It's a long slide. Sorry about that. But we are looking forward to hear your questions. And I give floor to Rosisa and Haluk Bey. They will facilitate this Q&A session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Levent Bey. It was very, very interesting and very insightful. Let's say, if you want to understand more exactly, that's why we host this consultations in order for the stakeholders to understand a bit more what is all about. And of course, I will give some time for Q&A, and if somebody wants to address some questions to the experts, this is a good opportunity to do so. And of course, be ready for the Mentimeter survey, which is also prepared for this occasion. So would you like to ask some questions? I saw, by the way, some questions in the chat box. And there were some comments from Teoman Sanalan. There are also some comments from Marusha. So maybe you can address them directly to the experts, or should I read them? I don't know. There's some ideas, let's say. Well, I can maybe go through the first one that I see in the chat box. While language differences being mentioned, I wish to emphasize that language differences are mainly between sectors and stakeholders regions. It's kind of comment that we received. There is a comment, question from Berenger from the World Bank. If the two grievance redress mechanisms are both managed by BSEC, why is there is a need for two separate mechanisms?
Sunt gestionate ülkeyi tarafından yönetilecekse neden iki ayrı mekanizmaya ihtiyaç var?
Еще мати два окремих механізми.
Consultations in the afternoon, and keep some time for the stakeholders to address the questions, because this is a good opportunity for them to address some questions. And we will have, in any case, time with the World Bank to discuss this bilaterally further today. I believe this will be the best approach. Anyone to ask questions from the stakeholders? Or some remarks, comments when it comes to the project? Okay, all right. So in this case, I would like to propose to start with the Mentimeter, and this is a good opportunity for everybody to be part of the consultations. So I
think there is a question from Marussia.
Oh, really? Could you please address it because I cannot see it? Could you please read it?
No, I just seen a hand raised, therefore.
Ah, okay then. Oh, excellent. Marussia, could you please ask your question?
Maybe it was accidental.
Most probably, yes. All right. So,
if you like, Rodessa, let me just address a couple of the points that have been made in the chat box.
all right, excellent. It's good, and afterwards we continue with the Mentimeter. All right.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Thank you.
One question is from Mauricio about the education on all levels, schools, university, and non-formal. In fact, the project aims to not necessarily go to the school level, but capacity building, especially in the sector, not only in the focal points or agencies, but in the general public and the grant beneficiaries as well. So there would be some activities on capacity building, providing trainings for better project development, as well as protecting the Black Sea in terms of actual measures. Like it was mentioned in the chat box as well about the integrated nature of the issues for Blue in the Black Sea. That's of course the case. That's why a co-innovation challenge wants to address the with a looking forward approach, address the innovative approaches on various fields, and it's basically open to almost all fields to come up with new ideas and to look at if ideas are already developed, to put some pilot actions under what we call the host of innovation, or the that's assigned by the national focal points. And in these presentations today, thanks for your patience, we try to basically address the potential environmental risks and impacts more from a sort of negative grant point of view, as it was natural, but otherwise we had mentioned about the project as well. And one note there was, so I should mention that perhaps again from Teoman Bey, about the initiative by OECD in the area covering the Black Sea countries on Green Action Plan. So that was a good note. I think that might be taken into consideration, because at a certain stage of the project aims to increase the cooperation between both the national and regional agencies to make more funding available and information available for protecting the Black Sea. And with regard to the language difference between the sectors and the people, yes, the sectors have to talk to each other, but this is a regional project with interrelation of all the sectors, including not only the environmental factors, but also the social and economic factors and players in that. So I think this project would be beneficial in terms of all of those by taking the relevant actions to increase stakeholder engagement and participation in the process, and with controlling the minimum or low level impacts that would come. Thank you very much. So should we go with the Mentimeter?
Yes, we can, and in the chat box, Evie already provided the link, so we go and you can explain how everybody can register and participate in this online survey.
Please just in your browsers put the menti.com link, and then that would be coming a code asking for a passcode, and by using that code you can see our questions.
Haluk Bey, there is a question from Valery.
Yeah, we cannot see it less. Yes, we can take it, but do I have in the...
While people are trying to register to menti.com and put the code is in the chat box, okay. As well as, yes, you can address this question, as well as there is another one in the chat box from the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Moldova. So if you want to, you can address first Valery, afterwards we do the survey, and afterwards come back to what is from, I mean, it's up to you to decide how to arrange, but yes, there are some, yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, I can see the question from the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Moldova, but somehow I'm missing the question of Valery. So let me just read the question first. If the project is aimed at reducing pollution in the Black Sea Basin, will be correlated with the documents developed at national level that address the pollution criterion. For example, in Moldova, we have approved at the national level the Danube Approved and Black Sea Basin Management Program, which addresses the pollution factor and comes with an action plan to reduce it. To our knowledge, yes, the national policies would be looked at, plans and investment plans as well, in terms of developing the further recommendations in the course of the project to include further issues in the national policies if needed. And plus to suggest some actions for investment, and that would be, of course, discussed and decided together with the national focal points. That might be an answer that I can provide that for that question.
There's a comment on Mentimeter. Is it working now?
It works,
and also,
yes.
I think Valerie is raising hands. Probably
Yes,
will
yes.
ask a question.
Valerie, please go ahead if you like. In the chat box, I am reading Valerie's question. Are there international economic mechanisms for the influence, for example, of the World Bank or other international organizations to industrial enterprises that pollute the water of rivers and the sea? I think this question might be better forwarded to the World Bank colleagues, perhaps, if they like to answer at this moment. Ms. Gulana, would you like to say something on that?
Sorry, Haluk Bey, what was the question? I was going.
Let me read it. It's in the chat box. Are there international economic mechanisms for the influence, for example, of the World Bank or other international organizations to industrial enterprises that pollute the water of rivers and the sea? To my yeah, please go ahead.
For these transboundary pollutions, there is a convention on transboundary pollution which regulates these relations. Also, for the World Bank, for the activities supported by the World Bank, these are regulated under the environmental and social framework, environmental and social standards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then there's another question I see in the chat box. Will the project help governments to address the problem at source? Example, ban single-use plastics and require glass bottles with deposits for drinks. I think we should answer it in such a way that there won't be a direct interference on that, but there would be recommendations on the national policies and future national investment plans, which might be indirectly serving for this at the policy and perhaps regulation level. And with regard to the eco-innovation activities, there might be a support of the some innovative ideas on those issues. I don't know if
I mean, to complement this, the response to the question about the government to address the problem at source. There are several ways the project will support the government. One is through the drafting of regulation, if there is a need to complement or add or refine existing regulation. There is also through the preparation of investment plan and through the preparation of investment itself. So that would be another way. And the third way is, like you said, via the Eco-Innovation Challenge, because this is going to promote innovation in the private sector to address pollution. But just to be clear, the question is about plastic. The project is not about plastic. The project is about nutrient pollution. So the project will focus exclusively on nutrient pollution. We hope to be able to work on the plastic pollution, but for now, this is not the focus of the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the explanation and for the questions. I think there are no further questions in the chat box. So if you are ready, let's go for our live survey. Okay, a question I'm reading: will ports be involved in the project? Again, the answer to that might be they might be, but there is no necessarily direct intervention for the ports or an action. But as Ms. Granger talked about, the project would serve from different ways for all the polluting sources of the Black Sea. So we are on Mentimeter. The first question: have you got information on the project before this consultation meeting? And we have about 10-14 participants now. It's a little bit increasing. Please go ahead and help us to get some feedback from you on those topics. So we'd be glad to hear those and incorporate those in the further planning and implementation stages for our activities. So we have 9, almost 20 people. One more perhaps vote would be nice, at least reaching the 20. So from what we see, about half of the voting participants have at least some partial info, not half, 3/4 of that, have some information on the project. Half of them have information, and the other 1/4 have partial information. So I think for this moment we can pass to the next question. We are expecting this is an open-ended question. We're expecting just your opinion in one word or a couple of words about what would be your expectations from the project for your country. Perhaps if you can note your country, it would be helpful for us as well. For which country you're mentioning, just you might put some words or a phrase. It might be comparatively difficult than multiple choice, but this is just for your own words and on your own judgment. If you don't put anything, we should be thinking that the already defined. Okay, enhanced national capacities. Thank you very much. Yes, pollution prevention, reduction of pollution in the context of protection and sustainable use of water resources. Yes, very good. And I think we might be happy to say that the project aims and covers those. Supporting full water treatment plant recycling industry. All right. Recommendations for a clear and understandable legal framework on the issue. Higher awareness of the issues and taking responsibility for reducing pollution loads. Improved environment pollution reduced. Reducing the level of pollution and popularizing the issues of environmental preservation in Ukraine. Great. New possibility for regional development projects, decreasing water pollution. So we have 10 participants already mentioned their ideas. Thank you very much for all. Should we just wait for some more minutes? Let's see. Okay, reduction of pollution. So we are around the same things. Okay, responsibles on behalf of the governmental agencies. Not read the one below, but we are on reducing the pollution, increasing the capacity, national capacity. Okay, it's just raining, great. Tangible decrease of impact on Black Sea, strengthening the capacity to implement EU legislation, mitigation, deep sea domestic waste discharges, help resolve key issues that inhabit marine, improve biodiversity, ecosystems, and of course, recreational angle economy. It may motivate industries to maintain more sustainable productions on both national and international scale, rehabilitate rivers. Thank you very much all for all your points. So these would be basically addressed or taken into account in the further steps of the project. Let's go to the next question, not to keep you very long, I believe. What would be the major benefits you or your institution would expect from the BSEC project? Please, we have some choices, but select at most 3. We have got capacity building, innovative development, reaching international finance sources, improved dialogue and cooperation between stakeholders, improved environmental quality. And there's another choice. You're not able to go right what other is, but there might be some other expectations which you might just want to tick. Okay, what I see, improved dialogue and cooperation is taking the lead. Where, okay, reaching international finance sources is just going with that. Improved environmental quality, capacity building. So in fact, for the moment, all of them are rather going close. Improved environmental quality of the Black Sea and improved dialogue is taking the lead. Yes, capacity building and innovative development is comparatively less benefits that might be expected, it seems. Reaching international finance sources is also an important aspect and expectation in that sense. So they are now all over 10 votes, and like capacity building, innovative development, reaching international finance sources, improved dialogue, very close to each other. Improved quality is the biggest expectation for the Black Sea from the BSEA project. Any other words? So I think let's pass to the next question. Okay, this is more an informative question for us. Are you acquainted with the World Bank environmental social standards? That we have already talked and you might have known. You might have already heard them. You might be working on them. You might have experience on them, or you haven't never heard them. Okay, it seems the ones that heard about the standards and the ones that haven't never heard them, they're just going close to each other. So this might give us a further opening to make first steps, some stakeholder engagement or some sort of training or information sharing on these standards for the future activities in scope of the project or at least in the scope of capacity building. Okay, it's about like 50-50 who have heard them and not heard them. And we have a couple of our participants who have been working on those or working with those standards and applying in different projects. Any other words coming? Let's go to the next question. Okay, we have discussed the World Bank ESS is applicable for the project. You might remember 6 of them. So the question is, which one of them or which 3 of them, maximum 3, might be difficult to implement in your country or by your institution? We are looking for your opinion based on what we have already presented. We have 6 standards that would be applicable for the Blue Black Sea project. And we try to give little information, I know, but based on your whatever you understand or on your knowledge coming beforehand, which might be the more difficult ones that would be implemented in your country or by your institution if you're not thinking country-wise. So we have 2 votes for the biodiversity part, ESS 6, biodiversity conservation and sustainable management of natural resources. It became 4. All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your ideas. Thank you. Please continue. So ESS 6 is more like water. Then comes the labor and working conditions, and then resource efficiency and pollution prevention management. All right. Biodiversity is having the lead with some differences, and then ESS 3, ESS 2, ESS 1. All right. All right. This also, I think, supports us on thinking for what type of capacity building, what type of information sharing we should consider, or the project should consider in the coming stages, so that this awareness could be increased. Plus, these difficulties might be solved, or at least positively contributed to become more easily applicable in our participating countries for the Building the Black Sea project and the institutions involved. Next question, please. I think we are fine with that. Okay, now in this question, we are looking for, in the implementation of the project activities, especially the physical ones we have mentioned, small scale construction, some agricultural activities, what type of risks or adverse impacts might be of concern in your opinion? We are expecting you to select at most 2 of them. We have provided like environmental impacts, more on the physical ones in the first choice, like water, air, noise, soil. The second one is the environmental impacts on more living resources like biodiversity, biological resources, vegetation. The third one is labor and working conditions. The fourth one is occupational health and safety. The other is stakeholder engagement and social impact. And then we have 2 choices of all of the above and none of the above. So you might select one of them as well to give us some feedback on that. I see that physical impacts are more expected. Then comes the impacts on the biological environment, issues about the stakeholder engagement, and social impacts are also high comparatively. Okay, we have some all of the above and none of the above. Thank you very much for your opinion. Labor and working conditions, we have some comments on that as well. More and more I see the physical and the biological source of environmental impacts and the social impacts in that sense, though comparatively low. Any other votes? Please, let's go to the next question now. This question basically asks about your institution, the institution you work for, carry out any environmental and social monitoring and or reporting activities. So we want to get an idea about if the institution you're working or the whatever agency, it might be non-governmental agency or governmental agency or private agency, takes part in any sort of environmental and social monitoring or reporting activities. And we have number 1, no, it does not. The other choice is doing only environmental monitoring. Another choice is doing only social monitoring. By the way, you can choose 2 options from here. In fact, the questions are arranged accordingly, like in one of the alternatives, we ask for reporting the monitoring results to the third parties, and the other is not reporting the monitoring results to the third parties. So you might be doing environmental monitoring and reporting the monitoring results to third parties, or you might be doing like environmental monitoring and not reporting it to third parties. Might be your choices. So what I see as the leading one, reporting the monitoring results to the to third parties. So somehow your agencies are reporting, so that means you're also somehow monitoring probably. Only social monitoring is just 1 vote we have. No, it does not say. 4 votes. 3, not reporting. 5, only environmental monitoring. More selections are coming, I see. Any other? So basically, we're doing like your institutes are doing in a part reporting to third parties and monitoring of environmental or social activities. Let's go to the next question. So in this one, we look at what type of information disclosure and public consultation methods would be more effective for the Blooming the Black Sea project in the further stages, in your own opinion. So we're asking you to select at most two. Of course, if there are resources and time, all of them might be looked for, but there we have to look at both the cost effectiveness and the benefits and costs of the issue. So please vote on those. What we have as choices: sharing of written information through the internet, some public meetings, separate meetings with selected groups with similar characteristics, such as focus groups, meetings for like elderly or women. Another choice is providing an email address or a web page where anyone can reach the project to ask questions to require information. Another one is providing a phone number through which anyone can reach, and there is another option as well. So I see that mostly it's about sharing written information in public meetings, which are more sort of general practices in many projects. And then, of course, we have the separate meetings for focus groups as well, as I can see. Providing some web pages, email addresses is also following that. All right, so basically we have a sort of little stairs starting from providing some web pages to reach information, followed by some focus group meetings and the public meetings, and general written information sharing. And mostly, especially when this becomes a regional project, it's more like inclined to sharing written information through the web and having some emails that you can put your or send your comments or your ideas or questions. Focus groups and public meetings are also favored in your own opinion, as we see. Let's go to the next question. So we are almost there. I know it's lunchtime for some of you, some of them already passed. This is again an open-ended question. We're asking for a couple of words stating the factors that you would consider important for the effectiveness and success of the Blooming the Black Sea project. So in your opinion, what would you see as the factors? Stakeholder engagement, that should be focused on. Good and constant communication with stakeholders, yes, stakeholder engagement. We are expecting your opinion still. Okay, transparency and openness of information. Again, information disclosure, stakeholders, collaboration with all parties involved, support of local authorities, transparency. So we are more on the social grounds about information sharing and cooperation, communication and financial support. Okay, financial support is a part down there as a, let's say, different factor to be focused on. Clear and measurable objectives and targets. Okay, supporting of local authorities, efficient and wider awareness studies. Okay, we should be working on how efficient it could be designed. Systematic, consistent stakeholder involvement, cooperation with all parties, stakeholder engagement, financing. So we are concentrating on stakeholder engagement, cooperation, and financial support, it seems, together with, of course, clear and measurable objectives. Communication transparency, again, stakeholder engagement, information, clear application rules for stakeholders. Okay, how the stakeholders could be involved in the project. That's what I understand from that point. In others, so it's concentrated on enhanced, detailed, clear stakeholder involvement and transparency in the development of the project, together with support to the especially local authorities, it seems, with some, of course, financial means as well. Any other opinion coming? So let's go to the last question, if there is nothing else. And the last question is basically a bit for ourselves, how we would rate the usefulness of this consultation meeting. There are 5 choices, as you can see. So please rate how useful you found this meeting. So it would be a reference for us as well. So for the moment, I am happy that at least no one voting found it useless or very useless. We have a neutral vote, but mainly it seems at least the participants that get into the Mentimeter found the meeting rather useful, which makes myself and I think all the project team happy to hear about. Should we wait a couple of seconds more? Nothing is coming, it seems, and I think we should give the ground to Ms. Rositsa to wrap up
Yes.
our meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Halup Bey. It was really very interesting, and I would like to thank everybody on behalf of the BSEC Secretariat for their active contribution and participation in the discussions as well as in the survey. I would like also to thank our experts, Halup Bey and Levent Bey, as well as the 4 translators that helped everybody to understand, to listen the presentation in their national languages, as well as Evgenia, who support us from, behind the scene, let's say. Thank you, Evie, for this excellent organization of the event. Of course, I would like to share with you that the results of the meeting today, as well as answers collected through the Mentimeter, will be summarized and made public on the BSVKC website. You have the link in the chat box, but of course, I can also provide again the link. So everything related to the project will be placed in the BSVKC website, as well as we will leave the link to the survey open. So whoever wants to again try to give his answer or her answers to the survey is welcome to do so after this event. Another very important information I would like to share with you that there will be country-specific discussions on the Eco Innovation Challenge, where environmental and social issues will be also covered and further addressed during the project implementation. For us, for the Secretariat, as well as for the World Bank, the stakeholder engagement is very important, and it's a continuous process, as it already we've seen this in the survey. So stakeholders engagement is a very important process. It's part of the project, and we are ready to benefit from your engagement in the process, and your work matters. So I will stop here because we are really behind the time that we envisage for this consultations. You can reach us through the BSVKC website. There is an email that you can use, and you can ask more questions, more ideas with us. And so thank you very much. And it was an honor for us to be with you today. I wish you all the best, and thank you very much for your presence today. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you very much, everyone.